Africa Channel 405. Thank you for joining us. Namibia's President Hage Geingob has been re-elected for a second term. He won 56.3% of the vote, while ahead of his nearest rival, Panduleni Itula. This is down from the 87% he won during his first term in 2014. His re-election comes as the country faces one of its worst corruption scandals. Officials demanded cash in exchange for political favors and the exploitation of Africa's resources, particularly granting exclusive fishing rights to an Icelandic company. Our Africa analyst, Jamie Mighty, joins us in studio now to unpack the story. Jamie, welcome to Newsworld. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
I mean, you know, before we get into this anatomy of the bribe, this fascinating documentary, because I think this is where the story is. Let's just chat about the elections firstly. I mean, we know that he's had a drop in his polls compared to the last time that they had elections back in 2014. Do you think that this is the cracker that he needed to maybe fix what's happening in Namibia? I mean, we'll talk about the corruption scandal, but I mean, they're faced with massive economic issues as well, like with the rest of the continent and parts of the world that you see protesting now. Do you think that this drop is a wake-up call for him?
So I think it's very clear that SWAPO came in with a weaker mandate than they had before. Since 1994, SWAPO has been enjoying a two-thirds majority in running Namibia, and the president had an 87% support base coming into this particular election. But with high unemployment at 33%, with a drought, and with massive corruption being exposed in respect to the fish rot scandal, which we'll unpack shortly, there was a lot of public sentiment which shifted against the president and SWAPO. And in fact, you had an independent candidate who was running, Mr. Pendulani Italia. And he actually was interesting because he's a dentist, he's a lawyer, prominent member of Namibian society, and he decided to run, even though he was a member of SWAPO, he decided to run as an independent, and he got 26% of the vote. And that was a reflection, I think, around how the public was so frustrated that they were willing to even look at other alternatives. The opposition party...
It's a significant number for an independent candidate.
Yeah, it is a significant number, especially when you consider that it was his first time contesting. Now, the second thing that is important to think around is that the opposition grew in size. Now they have 16 of the 96 seats. So basically what this portends to is now a transition away from a dominant party state, which is what Namibia has been basically since 1990 when they attained independence, to now closer to being a multi-party
political landscape is changing.
Exactly, it's changing. And what we may see is that there may be a growth coming to the next election. So this particular period is a period where I think the president will have to reshape SWAPO, rebrand it, so to speak. Otherwise, what we could eventually see is a weakening of support, because 56% of support for the presidential candidate is actually not that great of support. And going to the next election, what could actually happen is that Pendulani could be the favorite outright, and that could lead to a transition of power.
There was another opposition candidate as well who's also now saying, I think McHenry Vanani of the Popular Democratic Movement, and he's also he was saying that he's not very entirely comfortable or confident in how free and fair these elections were. I mean, I know there was a delay in the announcement of the results, something to do with the electronic machines, and also bear in mind they were the first country on the continent actually to use these electronic machines. I mean, were the elections free and fair? I mean, they're saying there was a delay to make sure that it was.
Look, I think considering the strength of SWAPO in Namibia in particular, I don't think that there's real credence to the fact that they weren't free and fair. Also, when you look at the fact that, I mean, there were irregularities, but these irregularities don't seem to have been material to the extent where we can really put a red flag on these elections. Unlike Mozambique, unlike Zimbabwe, unlike even DRC, this was actually pretty standard. The outcome, I think, was so unfavorable to the ruling party as to cast a shadow of doubt on any claims that, there was real manipulation here. Of course, there's always tinkering. This is Africa. But I think that those claims are not going to hold much water. And the PDP will just have to work harder to gain. And they've done well in this particular election. Obviously, sometimes there's a bit of, ego massaging that happens by complaining about the outcome.
I mean, we're going to talk about this Al Jazeera documentary that also, it was a part of WikiLeaks, and it was called The Anatomy of a Bribe. But let's just talk about some of the corruption, and maybe to talk about his reshuffling of the cabinet now. I mean, do we know if he'll reshuffle his cabinet? What sort of reforms he's promising?
So, I mean, what the president has tried to do now is to promise that they're going to relook at electoral funding, because a lot of irregularities were pointed around how SWAPO was getting funding from international companies to actually run their elections. So there's been promises of that. Obviously, we know that 2 ministers have been asked to resign. So those particular jobs need to be filled, as fisheries as well as justice, important portfolios considering the economic activity in Namibia. So we're going to have to see how the president conducts his brand management of SWAPO as a ruling party moving forward, because people are really frustrated. And that 33% unemployment rate, which disproportionately affects the youth, has led to a lot of discontent in the student movements and, with the youth in general. And that is a ticking time bomb for the party, especially considering some of the corruption scandals that have emerged. However, I think if you juxtapose how Namibia has dealt with the corruption scandal to how South Africa's dealt with their corruption scandal,
we could take a page out of their book. I mean, they were quick tack, and I think, I must be careful here, but SWAPO possibly could have even gotten this victory because of the way they handled the scandal. I mean, just before the elections, those ministers were resigned. I think also some are standing trial now, or, facing corruption scandals. But maybe let's just talk about this fishing scandal. So it was the fisheries minister, as well as President Gangob's lawyer, who's also involved in this scandal, and it surrounds a documentary that Al Jazeera had done called The Anatomy of a Bribe, and basically giving exclusive rights to an Icelandic company for fishing rights in Namibia. Maybe to unpack this more for us. I mean, it's an over an hour documentary. It was an undercover documentary. I didn't watch all of it, but I found...
Basically what we have here is an international fishing corruption scandal. It involves Iceland, Angola, and Namibia, and it gives us an idea around how corruption actually occurs at a multinational level with these multinational companies. So you've got an Icelandic fishing company which is called Samherji. So at some point, and it's a major fishing company, they have major fishing deals in the UK and across the world.
They're fishes on the shelves of major retailers.
Exactly. And so it's a big time company. So in 2012 they decided that, listen, they want to get a piece of the action in Namibia. So they sent a guy called Johan Stephenson. So he comes to Namibia and he's got a mandate: get fish by any means necessary. Whatever you have to do, do it. So he actually spends the time between 2012 and 2016 bribing Namibian officials to controlled by the Namibian Fishing Company, which is like a state-run fishing company, SOE of sorts. So at the end of 2016, he, for whatever reason, feels disgruntled with what he's doing, and he becomes a whistleblower.
He now has a moral conscience.
Exactly. So he, before he resigns from the company, steals 40 gigs of information pertaining to all of his transactions, all of the deals in Namibia, and he basically gives those documents to WikiLeaks. What then follows up is that Al Jazeera, with help from Icelandic journalists as well as Namibian journalists, do a sting operation where they try to replicate the corruption trail that has been demonstrated by this guy to bust the Namibian ministers in action, so to speak. So they create this facade that they've got a Chinese company that's coming to Namibia looking for fishing rights. So basically what happens is they access Namibia through the president's lawyer, Sisa Namanje. So Sisa Namanje basically connects them with everybody that they need to meet. And the main actors in this story is Bernard Esau, who's the Minister of Fisheries. Then you've got Saki Shangala, who's the Minister of Justice. And then you've got some actors who are actually interesting because they're related to the Minister of Fisheries through marriage. So you've got a guy called James Hatiklupi. He's the chairperson of the fishing company. Then Tamzon Hatiklupi is his nephew, but his nephew is actually married to the daughter of Bernard Esau.
It's a soap opera.
It's a movie. And this cabal in addition with this guy called Mike Ngipunya, who's the CEO of Fish Corps. They are the central hub of this fishing scandal. So all of them meet up, and basically what they do is they take money from whoever the actor is, and instead of issuing these fishing quotas or fishing licenses on the open market where there's supposed to be competition, what they do is that if you've paid the bribe, so to speak, then you get preferential treatment, even if you didn't pay the highest price. So what's interesting around this is that from 2012, Saki Shangala, who was basically not a main actor in Namibian politics, because of his involvement in this mix, he then begins to rise through the party quite quickly. And he rises to the point where in 2018 he becomes Minister of Justice. And these guys are living in mansions in Namibia. They're going on holidays in Iceland, which should have been a red flag to anybody watching.
All of this under SWAPO's watch as well.
You know, the thing is, SWAPO is a corrupt political party. I can say that without any compunction. They're a corrupt political party. And the proximity these people had to the president is quite alarming.
Close.
Yeah, because
president's lawyer.
President's lawyer, Minister of Justice, Minister of Fisheries. And you must remember, fishing is a big deal in the Namibian economy. Not only did this happen, although Al Jazeera couldn't approve it, there was also a fishing contract which was entered into between Namibia, Angola, and Samheri. So now you can see that the coastline of Angola and Namibia is being fished by this fishing company in a way that's dubious. And there were attempts to deny these allegations, but the WikiLeaks were quite comprehensive. And the interesting thing about the Al Jazeera documentary, which is called The Anatomy of a Bribe, which is about the scandal, which is called Fish Rot, is that they were actually able to capture on camera the ministers accepting bribes, the ministers explaining how their shell accounts worked.
They have bank records as well.
Bank records, because they actually transacted. At some point, the Minister of Justice actually asks for an iPhone with the dual SIM. You know, it's exclusive to China. He says, listen, you guys want to chat with me, you want to send me WhatsApps, but you know, it's difficult because I've got this iPhone and you guys are from China, so why don't you get me a dual SIM iPhone to make my life easier? They get him the iPhone, he's really convinced that they're legit, and they have this conversation. So when he gets busted, it's just close to the elections, and he's trying to negotiate a $200,000 contribution to himself and to the party SWAPO. And he's explaining that, listen, you've got to put this money in this account, and then that's where the president's lawyer also gets very involved, because he's involved in managing all of the various shell accounts. There's even offshore accounts which are involved in this whole scandal. So when Al Jazeera releases this particular content to the world, what then happens is that the arrests are done. So Saki Shangala, James Hatiklupi, Tamzon Hatiklupi, as well as Benedisau are
officials as well. They've also been fingered. They're also going through their own criminal procedure.
Absolutely, because it is illegal.
Yeah, but all parties involved are now denying any sort of wrongdoing.
Well, I mean, that's I think, legalese, right? Because when you have video footage of a minister asking for a bribe, instructing what must happen, where the money must go, even accepting an iPhone on camera, this is an open and shut case. The party is over for these gentlemen, and I think Namibia is better off as a result. The trial still has to happen. Evidence still has to be submitted. And the whistleblower
overwhelming evidence.
The whistleblower has said that he is willing to go to prison, right, for his involvement in this bribery scandal. But what he will not do, is allow these people to get away with it. So you've got to, unlike with the Trump scandal, where the whistleblower is unknown, here the whistleblower has come forth and said, here's my evidence, I've got these documents, they're now on WikiLeaks, they're publicly ascertainable, you can check them, I can check them, the viewer at home can check them and read for themselves. So this is basically an open and shut case. And when you juxtapose it with South Africa, that's when you see it's interesting, because we went the commission route, didn't we?
Jamie, maybe we'll pick up this conversation. Let's take a short break, and then we'll unpack more of the anatomy of a bribe. Stay tuned.